Hello and buongiorno amici! I'm Peter and here I'm telling you stories about the most interesting European cars of the 80s and 90s. Today we're talking about a forgotten Italian car that was one of the most strongly built civilian cars ever and one of the first luxury SUVs in the world. The Rayton Fissore Magnum, known in the United States as La Forza. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to never miss a new video. And if you have already subscribed, thank you so much! Now, let's get back to the car. I have to admit that I knew nothing about the Magnum La Forza until my viewer Tracy, who owns one of them, told me about it. I started to read about that car and I found it very interesting. So, let's learn about it together. And thank you very much Tracy for bringing it up and for your help. In 1919, brothers Fissore, Antonio, Bernardo, Giovanni and Constanza created a coach building company in Savigliana, near Turin, Italy. The company existed until 1984 and designed and built bodies for many car manufacturers, including DKW, TVR, De Tommaso and Monteverdi. Carrozzeria Fissore didn't have the fame of Pininfarina, but it was quite well known and respected in the car community of that time. In 1976, a daughter of Bernardo Fissore, Fernanda Fissore, opened in a nearby town of Cerasca an independent car building company together with her husband, Giulio Malvino. It was named Rayton Fissore. Fissore obviously to benefit from the reputation of the old Carrozzeria Fissore, and Rayton... Well, I haven't found any information about where the name Rayton came from, despite all my efforts. If you know that, please tell me in the comments below. Fernando and Giulio first tried to enter the market as external designers for Fiat and created prototypes of a convertible version of the Fiat Ritmo, which I have another video about, and a wagon version of the Alfa Romeo 75. But those cars never made it to production, and Rayton Fissore decided to take another way and create its own car, and this car was the Rayton Fissore Magnum. The Magnum was built on a shortened platform of the Iveco VM90, well, its prototype Iveco 40 PM10 to be precise, which in its turn was built on the basis of the 4x4 version of the Iveco Turbo Daily van. The first idea was to create a 4x4 off-road car for police and military applications, but soon a new approach was adopted, and the Magnum was positioned as a large luxury SUV. There were not many cars in this category at that time. Europe had the Range Rover and the G-Class of Mercedes-Benz, which were not much luxurious at that time. America had Jeep Grand Wagoneer and the GMC Suburban, but they were unknown in Europe. So, the Magnum was one of the first large luxury SUVs and one of trailblazers of that very popular in 2000s category of cars. The design of the car was developed by Tom Tiarda, who also created the Fiat 124 Sport Spider, the Tommaso Pantera, Ford Maverick, Chrysler LeBaron, and many other cars. Allegedly, the design was created under the impression of an extremely popular Fiat Uno, designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro. This design was simple but very modern at the time, in the first half of the 80s. There is a common misconception that the Magnum La Forza was created by Pininfarina studio. This mistake came from the logo of Pininfarina on American versions of the car. Tom Tiarda did work for Pininfarina, but he left it and created his own design studio several years before the creation of the Magnum. Pininfarina produced the bodies and interior for American La Forza as a contract manufacturer, but it didn't participate in the development of the car. Another common misconception is that the La Forza was a secret Ferrari development, the first Ferrari SUV. This legend probably was born and somewhat supported by the American distributor and manufacturer of La Forzas for marketing purposes. There was a commercial for the La Forza where it was told about the production of the La Forza at the Pininfarina's plant together with the Ferrari Testarossa, and it could create an impression that those cars were related. That impression becomes stronger when you find similarities between some elements of the interior of the La Forza and Ferraris, buttons and so on. Some owners of the La Forza even put Ferrari badges on their cars. But all those rumors are not true. Rayton Fissore didn't have any affiliation with Ferrari or Fiat, who owned Ferrari at that time. They just used some easily available Fiat parts in the Magnums. The design of the Magnum was very progressive for 1985 when the sales of this car began. That rounded corners became popular in car design in the 90s, and in the middle of the 80s the look of this car was ahead of time. The bodies of the first pre-production prototypes were made of fiberglass, but the production cars were made of steel, very good one by the way. But hoods on most European Magnums were still made of fiberglass. For a low production car, of course, using some parts from other cars was inevitable. The chassis and drivetrain came from Iveco, that was partly owned by Fiat. The lights came from Fiat itself. The engines for European Magnums also mostly were borrowed from various Fiat-related cars. And the door handles were taken from Lancia Delta, which I have another video about. The body itself, however, was made by Rayton Fissore itself, well, at least for European cars. And it was actually a good one. The metal was very thick and good, which was unusual for Italian cars of the 80s. Rayton Fissore developed and patented a special construction technique for the body called univis, based on a square tubular structure of a space frame of the body. As a result, the car was very sturdy. It was definitely the most strongly built Italian car of the 80s, and probably the most durable civil passenger car in the world at the time. And it was a large car. It was wider and taller than Chevrolet Suburban, which was proudly mentioned in the American commercial for the Laforza. It had a huge ground clearance from 8 to 10 inches for different versions, or 20 to 25 centimeters. At the same time, it was relatively short and had a very tight turning radius, the same as Honda Accord. But everything comes with a price, literally in this case, and the sturdiness made the car rather expensive, which negatively influenced the sales. And it made the Magnum very heavy, unusually heavy. Its weight was over 5,000 pounds, or 2,300 kilos, which of course affected the dynamics and fuel efficiency. But on the bright side, the size of the car meant large windows. And this in its turn meant very good visibility for the driver, which made the car safe and easy to drive. At the same time, the side mirrors were rather small for such a large car, but this wasn't a big deal. Interestingly, the mirrors on the police version of the Magnum were much larger than on civilian cars, but they didn't have power adjustment unlike the mirrors in the civilian version. Maybe that's why Rayton Fissore didn't use them in all Magnums. In 1989, a group of American investors, led by Robert Oliver and Joseph Monterosa, decided to bring the Magnum to the United States. This looked like a very good decision. American customers liked large cars as well as luxury cars, and the direct competitor, the Range Rover, was rather popular in the US. But they couldn't just import a car into the United States because of the difference between the American and European regulations. The approval process for foreign cars was long and expensive, and many European manufacturers decided to leave the American market in the 80s rather than build cars according to the American requirements. But Robert Oliver and Joseph Monterosa decided to take a different approach. Instead of seeking approval for the Italian car in the US, they decided to literally build their own car on the basis of the Magnum. So they imported partly assembled rolling chassis from Italy, made deep modifications using American parts, used already approved American engines and drivetrains, and assembled the cars on American soil in Brighton, Michigan. The American version therefore had different bumpers, different lights, different engines which required different hood, and many other modifications, over 50 in total. In addition, the American team decided that the quality of the body itself, painting, and interior trims wasn't luxury enough for American customers. So, the body and interiors of the American cars were built not by Rayton Fissore, but by Pininfarina as a contract manufacturer. After all those modifications, it was natural that the American version of Magnum received its own different name, Laforza, meaning power or force in Italian. So, all cars sold in the US were sold as Laforza, not Magnum. Both Magnum and Laforza had even more sturdy versions with bulletproof doors and windows. In Italy, the armored Magnums were used by the police, and in the US, reinforced Laforzas were advertised as a one-of-the-kind personal security vehicle. I don't have the information about how many bulletproof Laforzas were really sold, but I assume that this number wasn't great, because this modification made the already expensive car even pricier. Inside, the car was very spacious, comfortable, and in many cases luxurious. There was a difference between European and American cars. Many Magnums were very simply decorated, being intended for use in the police, forest ranger service, and other government agencies. Also, a simple version of Magnum was often purchased for farm and off-road use. There were luxury trimmed Magnums, but they were a little simpler than American La Forzas. The latter used high-quality Italian leather and real wood in decoration. The interior of the La Forza was adjusted, improved and handmade by Pininfarina. So this is a rare case for the 80s and 90s when an American version of a European car is really more interesting than the original one. The car had very comfortable large front seats with 6 ways of power adjustments. The La Forza was wide enough to comfortably accommodate 3 full-size places on the rear seat bench, and the rear passengers had a lot of legroom and headroom as well. The car had a lot of convenience features: powered seats, mirrors, windows, sunroof, and it had a lot of available options, especially for La Forzas, including cell phones and a built-in police radar detector. Luxury versions of the Magnum and all La Forzas were richly decorated with real wood panels. Unfortunately, those parts didn't age very well, and you can see the lacquer cracking on most of them now. But since it's real wood, they can be relatively easily repaired. And of course many interior parts, especially buttons and switches, were shared with other Italian cars, Fiat first of all. Fiat used them across the whole of their brand portfolio, including Ferrari, which added additional strength to the legend of the relations between La Forza and Ferrari. The engines also were borrowed from other cars, and the Magnum and La Forza had surprisingly many variants of them for low production cars. In Europe, the line of the engines at the start of the sales in 1985 included 3 engines. The first one was a 2-liter 4-cylinder supercharged Fiat Lancia engine with 138 horsepower and a top speed of 155 km or 97 miles per hour with 0 to 60 miles per hour in long 14.5 seconds. The heavy Magnum with this engine was clearly underpowered and slow, but it was a necessity because of very high taxes on cars with engines over 2 liters in Italy at that time. The second petrol engine was a 2.5-liter V6 engine from Alfa Romeo with 160 horsepower and a top speed of 168 km or 105 miles per hour and 0 to 60 in 13.7 seconds. The Magnum with this engine was marketed as Magnum VIP, was expensive, and only 120 cars with this engine were built. And the third engine was a 2.5-liter diesel one from Iveco with 4 cylinders, 92 horses and a top speed of 145 km or 91 miles per hour and 0 to 60 miles in 22.2 seconds. It was very slow but rather popular in the police and other government applications. In 1988, the smallest petrol engine was dropped, and the Alfa V6 was replaced by a 3.5-liter inline 6-cylinder naturally aspirated gasoline engine from BMW that the Magnum shared with the BMW E34. This engine, used only in 1988 and 1989, had 208 horsepower, a top speed of 180 km or 112 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 in 10.1 seconds. Also, the diesel engine was replaced by a 2.4-liter 4-cylinder turbo diesel from VM Motori with 110 horsepower and a top speed of 150 km or 94 miles per hour and 0 to 60 miles per hour in 18.8 seconds. Later, this diesel engine was replaced by another VM Motori turbo diesel with 2.5 liters, 120 horses and a top speed of 156 km or 98 miles per hour and 0 to 60 in 17.2 seconds. The engines of American La Forzas were a completely different story. When the car was first introduced to US customers in 1989, it had either a 5-liter V8 naturally aspirated gasoline engine from Ford Bronco with 187 horsepower or a supercharged V8 from Ford Mustang with 200 horses. In 1995, the American branch, under new ownership, started using a new 5.8 Ford V8 engine with 240 horses that was replaced in 1998 with a 5-liter V8 from Ford Explorer with 210 horsepower, with an optional supercharger that allegedly increased the power up to 320 horny ponies. And in 1999, when the contract with Ford expired, La Forza, which was produced in very limited numbers at that time, received a 6-liter V8 Vortec gasoline engine from General Motors, used also in the Chevrolet Silverado. This engine could be either a naturally aspirated one with 325 horses or supercharged with allegedly 455 horsepower. A top speed of all American cars was limited at 180 km or 112 miles per hour. The 0 to 60 miles per hour times were from 9.9 seconds for a 5-liter supercharged La Forza to 12.9 seconds for a naturally aspirated one, which was more or less in line with the Range Rover's dynamics of that time. European Magnums could have either a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic transmission. Most of them were manual. The La Forza was built with a 4-speed automatic transmission only, with some rumors about only one American car produced with manual transmission. The driving experience of the Magnum or La Forza heavily depended on what version of the car you had, what engine, what trim level, what year the car was produced, and for used cars, how previous owners treated the car. It never was a sports car. Even with the most powerful engines, its dynamics was rather moderate. But this wasn't the point. The Range Rovers and other large SUVs of that time also were not very fast. I would say it was a very versatile, solid car. It could reliably bring you anywhere on the road or without it. It cruised very well on highways, and the off-road capabilities of this car with enough torque in the engine and high ground clearance were really impressive despite its heavy weight. This was probably the closest one to the toughness of military vehicles that you could drive on the public road, long before the Hammer H1 and H2. By the way, Rayton Fissore created a couple of prototypes for the Italian army, but they never were approved. American customers could have a La Forza with a powerful engine and luxurious interior. It was virtually ideal family car, spacey, comfortable, relatively fast, very safe, reliable, large but very maneuverable, and capable with a towing capacity of 8,000 pounds. And it was a nice looking car outside and really beautifully decorated inside. And speaking of beauty, this video is sponsored by my wife, Yulia Nikonova. She is a professional artist and she paints beautiful landscapes. If you're looking for a unique gift or you want to add a beautiful decoration to your home and support this channel, please take a look at her website yuliaars.com. I will leave the link in the description to this video below. Back to the car, I believe there was actually a lot of space in the market for such cars, I mean large luxury SUVs. We could see it later, since the middle of the 90s and until today. But at the end of the 80s, La Forza was probably a little ahead of the time, and in addition, not very well known and promoted. So it was a very interesting and good car that couldn't unfortunately take its place on the market. Why? Well, I believe that this is a combination of high price, low promotion, and scandals connected to Rayton Fissore in the 90s. When the car was new, it cost about $50,000 in the US in 1990. This is about $120,000 today. It was cheap in Europe but still expensive. The price was in line with the Range Rovers and higher than many luxury cars of that time. But large manufacturers had more recognition, marketing investments and service support, and Rayton Fissore didn't. And without this, only real enthusiasts who wanted a very unusual car could buy it. And not many such enthusiasts had that kind of money. So in total about 6,000 cars were produced. About 1,200 of them were American La Forzas. Somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 cars were sold to Italian government agencies. In 1989, Fernando Fissore and Giulia Malvina sold an almost bankrupt company to a building contractor from Parma, Gregorio Maggiali. In 1990, after the death of Maggiali, Rayton Fissore was purchased by another investor, Roberto Capriolio. The company went bankrupt in 1992, but continued its existence for another 10 years under several other names and legal entities. In the 90s, Rayton Fissore, its successors and its officers and owners were involved in multiple scandals and investigations related to bribery, illegal paybacks, supplies of cars to the police and other agencies by inflated prices, false bankruptcies, and money laundering. As a result, just several hundred cars were produced between 1992 and 1998, when the European production of Magnums finally stopped. In the US, the production of La Forza continued from 1989 to 2003. Most of the cars were produced in 1989 and 1990. In 1994, the ownership of the American company went to Dave Hobbs, the owner of Monster Motorsports, known for V8-powered Mazda Miatas. In the last years of production, the manufacturing of the La Forza was at the level of several dozen per year, but still that car, conceived in the beginning of the 80s, made it almost to the middle of the 2000s. If you want to buy a Magnum in the United States now, you can legally import it from Europe. All Magnums are older than 25 years now. But in this rare case, I would recommend looking for a La Forza in the American market, unless you want some specific police specification Magnum. American La Forzas were better built, had better engines, were more luxurious, and in general are more pleasant cars to drive. And it's easier to find parts for engines and drivetrains. Those Ford engines and transmissions were very common. You may need to order the parts for the Iveco chassis from Europe, but they are available. The body and interior parts, however, are more difficult to find, almost impossible in some cases. So, if you are looking for a La Forza, make sure that it isn't missing something outside or inside. In general, finding a La Forza or Magnum is not an easy task. There are not many of them left around. But if you really want one, you will find it someday. In the US, the prices for La Forza slightly vary from $5,000 to $21,000, depending on the condition, with an assumable median around $9,000–$10,000. In Italy, the asking price for the Magnum is between 2,500 and 7,000 euros, with some place for negotiations. I believe that the Magnum, and especially La Forza, are much undervalued, considering their very interesting history and rarity. So, if you find one in really good condition for a fair price, it will be a very good buy. Well, thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much Tracy for bringing this car to my attention. And if you guys ever own or drove the Magnum or La Forza, please tell me about your own experience in the comments below. I really love to read your stories, thank you very much for them. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. New interesting stories are coming soon. Grazie mille amici, and see you next time!